Critical Role Recap Season 2, Episode 50. So last week we left off with the Mighty Nein having made their way to Felderwin and discovering that Not used to be a halfling and had a child and has a husband who has been kidnapped by Kryn, it appears, and then they escaped through some tunnels that they collapsed behind themselves. The Mighty Nein dug out that tunnel, the collapse part of it, and found their way into what seems to be some sort of natural chamber that the Kryn appear to be using to move throughout the Empire undetected. The Mighty Nein decide to set forth on their way through this tunnel, and that's where we pick up this week's episode. They begin their journey down this pretty narrow, it's about 10-foot diameter underground cavern chamber that continues on for miles and miles. And they end up traveling through it for multiple days, for maybe a week or two even. Early on, I believe their second day of travel, they ran into some sort of evil traffic cones from hell, which apparently are called ropers, and have giant vagina dentata teeth things going on. The ropers were reaching out their long tentacles to snatch people up and then would rope them and pull them in order to try and chomp on them. They did end up banishing one of them and then killed the other and quickly made their escape while the banishment wore off, because it only lasts for about a minute. And then once it wore off, it started to make its very slow way towards them, and so they basically just blasted it with all their ranged attacks as it tried to crawl into range to hit them, and they ended up killing off both of them and got out pretty unscathed. After that, they continued their rather boring journey through the cave of unchanging terrain in which they basically just kind of kept heading in a straight line. And during this time, Jester did speak with Not's husband a couple times and basically learned that he's no longer in the tunnels. They're definitely not right on the heels of these guys. He's already in this city of some sort and is being kept there. As they continue, they do find a little sort of encampment in this tunnel crossing area and run into a couple of kobolds that are hiding off in one of the chambers. When they stumble upon these kobolds, one of them immediately takes off and starts screaming for help, and soon the Mighty Nein find themselves surrounded by a large group of kobolds, about 40 of them, I believe. Basically, they end up navigating their way through this scenario by talking for once. And so they conjure up some food and hand over the alligator skins that they had, and offer up some tobacco and basically just kind of trade them food in exchange for their passage instead of having to fight. And so the kobolds eventually say, all right, you can go now. That's enough food. You all can go by. So the Mighty Nein continue on their way past where they meet up with kobolds. However, two of them, Caduceus notices, are following them as they go. Not turns around, goes invisible, and sneaks up on them to confront them. This is where our surprise guest, Chris Perkins, jumps in to play as one of the kobolds, and his name is Spurt. He describes himself as a kobold with all assortment of oddities on him. He's got a net basket full of centipedes. He has a bag of wasps that he uses as a weapon. He has a staff with a living scorpion on the end of it that he uses as his primary attack tool, and some other various and sundry rags and just sacks of gross things, basically. They speak with him briefly and learn that he doesn't really know much of anything, but he's hungry and likes food and doesn't seem to really care that much which way they go. And so they agree to bring him on as a guide, sort of, except he's never actually gone past where they are currently, so he doesn't really know his way, but it's straightforward anyway. And yeah, so they have some funny, very funny interactions with Spurt, the kobold. And then eventually they stumble upon a larger chamber and opening up from this cavern that they've been traveling in for days. And they feel an enormous amount of heat emanating from it. And they see lava and eventually find that there are two fire giants in this chamber. Spurt goes ahead and is leading the way with his scorpion held out in front of him, and just kind of makes his way stealthily into the room and looks around. Somehow, despite the fact that he has clanging pots and pans and bags clinking around on him, the fire giant's low roll enough perception that they don't actually see him. So he looks at the one big fire giant and chucks his wasp bag at them, which explodes and the wasps come out and attack, and then the fire giant turns around and smashes him with his giant hammer and kills him in one hit. And so ends our guest Spurt. After that, due to the fact that Spurt had gone out ahead of everyone, the Mighty Nein just kind of, hide in the tunnel and back themselves up against the wall. And when the giant looks down, doesn't really see anything, alerts the other giant that there might be something going on, but basically they just kind of go back to standing sentinel. So the Mighty Nein devise a plan of sorts to send out some distractions and use abilities and movement spells and just running in order to basically try and distract the fire giants and just sprint through to the other end of the chamber where they see a doorway on the opposite side without engaging in combat with the fire giants that they don't think they will be able to take on in regular combat. So as always, the plan doesn't exactly go according to plan, and combat does erupt, but they still spend all of their actions trying to get away for the most part. They do a little bit of damage to one of the ogres, and they do actually manage to successfully turn one of them into a cow for a short period of time. But then when Ford uses his Thunder Step with Yasha, the damage breaks the cow out of the cow form and returns it into an angry, pissed off fire giant. And then Caleb uses Polymorph again and turns one of them into a giant octopus, which has 10 base movement speed, a lot of health, but doesn't pose much of a threat. And so using that one that's slowed and stealth, they do narrowly manage to get out. Knot does actually go down from tipping her toe into the lava as she attempts to jump over the broken bridge pieces that had fallen into the water after the giant smashed into it. But luckily, Caduceus had already prepared a spell for the second he could see her. And so she goes down, immediately gets brought back up. Bo runs out there with her Step of the Wind, picks up Knot, and scurries her off back to safety. So they all manage to make it all the way through and into this other side of the tunnel, at which point Caduceus uses Stone Shape to put a 5-foot thick wall of stone where the opening to this hallway is that they've found, and the giants immediately begin to try and smash on the wall, but the Mighty Nein take off and make it to safety is the understanding. But that's where the episode ends. Basically, Caduceus throws up this stone wall and they scurry away from the combat, having escaped with their lives. For now, they're safe at least, and the next episode will pick up with them figuring out where exactly they are and how to get to Knot's husband. But yeah, that was pretty much it. It was a very funny episode and some interesting bouts of combat. Yeah, so thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.